America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker, the president of the Job Creators Network Foundation. Today, we're joined by Jerrod Sessler. Jerrod is a Trump-endorsed candidate for Congress in Central Washington. He's a decorated Navy veteran, successful entrepreneur, cancer survivor, former NASCAR driver, and the author of the brand new book titled How We Broke America, A Checklist to Fix It. Jerrod, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, you have had an incredible journey to get here. And I just think your background is so fascinating. First of all, thank you so much for your service. But I'm wondering if you can just, kind of tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to decide making that decision to run for office.
Yeah, definitely. Running businesses for decades and raising a family were probably the biggest driving factors to push me to run for office. Dealing with all the regulations in business, and then also just seeing where our society was going as a conservative Christian, where things were going in our country. I just felt like it was time for, regular people like you and I to stand up and be a part of the voice that is directing where we're going. I'm very honored to have President Trump's endorsement, and I fully support his policies and the things that he's doing for America. I think they're remarkable. But I also think as Americans, we have to think beyond President Trump and what are we going to be doing after this? President Trump can't fix this country on his own, and especially can't be done in just a couple of years. And so we have to think beyond that, and what kinds of policies and changes and people and what kind of methodology do we need to use? And so it's been an honor for me. I often say that I love the American dream, and it certainly didn't let me down. But I will also remind everyone that the American dream is only meaningful if you have two ingredients. And the first one is opportunity, one that people that support socialism, communism don't support. And the other thing that you have to have with opportunity is you have to put in the work. And if we live in a great America that has plenty of opportunity and you're willing to put in the work, you can have a very successful life here by God's grace. And so that's kind of my story. I grew up from a broken home. I had 5 stepfathers and was abused as a child. Grew up, graduated from high school, went into the military because I was honestly afraid to go to college at the time. I didn't think I had the self-discipline to be able to do it. And served in the military, got out, ended up getting 2 engineering degrees afterwards, worked in the engineering field for about 7 years before I started my own company. And that's kind of where I've been for the last 30 years. And, in the meantime, had the incredible honor this year's 29 years to be married to my beautiful wife, Nikki. And we had the honor of having 3 kids and raised them and homeschooled them and traveled the world with them. And it's been really an amazing life. The highlights that you mentioned are interesting, but the truth is, my family and my success with my family is probably the most important thing to me. And it's not that I'm not looking forward to what's ahead in life, but I'm not super concerned about it because I've had such a great life. I've lived the American dream, and I'm very satisfied with that.
Again, I just think you have a great story, but you mentioned that one of the things that's driven you to run for office is that you are a business owner, and so you understand being on the front lines of being a business owner. There's about 33 million small business owners in this country. And they employ about 60 million people. So just think about those people alone. You're talking about over 90 million people that are dependent on the success of small business. It's like almost a third of the country, right? And that doesn't even include their dependents. And so when you think about the policies that are so important for small business owners, they not only can make or break them, but they can what I think what a lot of politicians don't understand is that you mentioned regulations specifically. Those regulations, whatever it might be, they disproportionately hurt small business owners because when you're a large company and you've got hundreds, if not thousands of employees, you've got people. You've got extra people in your company that can deal with lawyers and accountants that deal with all those things. When you're a sole proprietor or an N of three, you've got three employees, you are the chief chief cook and bottle washer, right? You're doing everything. Talk about some of those challenges as a small business owner, and how you have faced some of those.
Yeah, I very much resonate with that. And I spent a good bit of my business years in the franchise industry. So we launched multiple national brands. We also acquired a brand that we had for a few years and sort of cleaned up and resold. And I love, I'll just spend just a minute here on franchising. I love it because it really does help, because franchisees are still small business owners. They're just local business owners that are paying for professional support from a national brand. And so they're still investing, but from a national brand standpoint, you're able to provide a lot of resources at scale to your locations. And what I always think of it is I think there's about 7 different hats that you have to wear as a local small business owner, which is very difficult. And I found it to be difficult as a young entrepreneur running my own business. I found there were certain things that I just was not really good at. For example, finance was one that I just have never really been driven by money and by the financial success. We've experienced plenty of it, but it's never been something that was a driver for me. As a result, I wasn't very good at it. And I ended up having to take some classes, and I ended up getting kind of excited about it as a result of learning some things. I think that's one characteristic of me is I love learning. I love reading, and I got so good at finance that I ended up creating a game called the Easy Profit Game, to help small business owners to be able to be better at running their business, being able to look at their numbers on their business and be able to use that as a tool to leverage to make decisions. And that game has been widely used within franchising and within other small businesses everywhere. So you can get a copy at easyprofitgame.com. I didn't think I was going to mention that today, but it's been one of the things that I've done. But yeah, I think having to wear all those hats is very difficult for business owners. And mind you, those 7 hats are just for business. That has nothing to do with the success of the rest of your life, your family and your spiritual life and, your recreation and your entertainment and all these different things. It's a load. And oftentimes it feels impossible. It feels like too much. And so I just think that's something for us to recognize. It is very important for us to deregulate small business in America. And I think President Trump and his team, I think of especially the work that Lee Zeldin's doing through the EPA is just incredible, the way they're slashing regulations. I heard just this week that during Trump's first administration, I think it was 3 or 4 to 1. They were eliminating 3 or 4 regulations for every one new. This so far this term, the ratio is closer to 10 to 1. So eliminating 10 with 1 new, which is incredible. And we need to continue that pace. In addition to that, I also feel like, and this sort of leans into some of the political stuff, we need to decentralize out of Washington, D.C. We need to get some of these organizations to sort of re-centralize and decentralize around the country in different areas. And I know they're doing that with the Department of Education, I think, is seeing its federal demise, which is great. But the Department of Agriculture is one that I heard just this last week that they're going to be decentralizing out of Washington, D.C. and moving those offices to more central locations throughout the country. And same thing with the FBI. My understanding, Kash Patel is working on decentralizing out of Washington, D.C. What people have to realize is that the states from a civic standpoint, the states are supposed to have more authority and more influence over local jurisdictions than the federal government. And unfortunately, over this last 249 years, especially the last 100, the federal government has really taken an authoritarian control over our lives and over a lot of the state's responsibilities. And that has a tremendous effect on our businesses, our business culture, our access to capital, and our ability to employ people. And so that needs to change. And obviously, I'm a huge advocate for deregulation and decentralization.
I think that's great. And one of the issues that has been such a killer for small businesses during the Biden administration is the reckless spending that led to historic inflation. And we saw inflation go as high as 9%. And it really was very difficult for our small business owners. We've seen it come down since then. We've seen it come down even more rapidly in the first 6 months of the Trump administration, with trying to get some of this spending under control. But what we haven't seen is the Fed cutting the rates. And what I'm hear from our small business owners is they want to invest because now the big beautiful bill has passed. And so they want to take advantage of the immediate expensing. They want to invest in equipment. They want to invest in expanding their businesses. But what's stopping them now is actually getting loans and getting the capital financing for it. And so I'm just curious, what do you feel about the Fed? And I mean, how do we get the Fed to move?
Yeah, well, the Fed's corrupt at its core. Unfortunately, it was started in 1913 in December, in the same year the 16th Amendment was passed in February, and those were really terrible for the trajectory of America. I'll just say that personally, I want to address this more kind of from a personal level, and then we can talk about business. It's frustrating to me I'll be 56 this year or this month. And I will say that I am frustrated because I feel like I've worked my entire life in the old economy. Every penny that I made was in the old economy. I've been serving for free, basically, in the political space for almost 4 years. And now I'm faced with costs that I consider to be in what I call the new economy. For example, we just had our daughter had her first grandbaby about 3 months ago. We're very enamored by that and enjoying it very much. She lives about 2.5 hours away, and I was driving up there. My wife is already there for a weekend visit, and I was driving up with my mom to get a little time. And I stopped to pick up an order at a restaurant that my daughter had placed, and so it was just 4 of us, and with the baby. Of course, the baby's not eating that food yet. So we were just feeding 4 of us from this little order that my daughter had placed for us. And I picked it up, and it was $114 for lunch for 4 of us for, these to-go items. And to me, it's astounding. I travel to Washington, D.C., and it's $300+ for a hotel room for one night. And if you're staying for a week, get your wallet out. I mean, it's astounding.
And 300 is cheap. I don't know where you're staying. I see 600.
Well, I'm one of the longtime Marriott members, and so I get their benefits, and I like their little lounges they have in their hotels. But that's my personal perspective, is that I'm really frustrated with the price of things. I'm disappointed that most of my working years are behind me, and whatever benefit that I had from those is now sort of supplanted by this new economy that, despite President Trump's best efforts, I think it's going to be very difficult for this to go away. We can start with just the energy sector for to begin with. Joe Obama canceled the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline, that's a natural gas and oil pipelines within the first few days of their illegitimate administration. And that was the beginning of the unraveling of our entire financial situation and status here in America, and it just got worse from there. But if we look at just policy and our country as a whole, again, I'm going to go back to regulation. One of the big problems we have for small business owners is access to capital. And we hear that statement. I've heard that statement for my entire life in business. And I just want to frame this up a little bit, but I want to talk about the ridiculous nature of regulation that is on banks in regards to lending. Also, if you look at the SBA, the Small Business Administration's definition of small businesses, their sizing is, and I feel like I've had some decent success in business and size of our company, and we never qualified as a small business. It's like if you're not doing $500 million a year, so it's like, how is that a small business? Like when I think small business, I think kind of the mom and pop sandwich shop that's in like, how are none of us eligible for any of these benefits? And I think that that's a symptom of members of Congress who simply don't understand what real small business in America is. Small business is a guy in a truck, a tradesman who's doing his job, or maybe even somebody who's expanded to 3 or 4 or 5 trucks. It's a sandwich shop or a bakery, or somebody who's traveling to do notary signatures, or these to me are small businesses. It's what I call employment replacement businesses, which I'm a big fan of. Where you have basically, instead of making a salary of maybe $100,000 or $120,000 a year or something, you start a business and you're able to produce maybe $300,000 or $400,000 a year, and you're able to earn a couple $100,000. And you can take Fridays off, or you can travel for a month with your family if you want to. There's lots of flexibility that comes with being in business. And my challenge with all of that is, why do we not have an SBA that actually pays attention to these truly small businesses? And when you go to the bank as what I consider, I consider a small business, the SBA or the government consider it's a micro business, or maybe a fledgling existence of somebody, I don't know. But you go to the bank and they won't even really talk to you like it's, oh, you need $50,000, or you need $100,000, or you need $500,000. It's just not even in there. They're not even interested. And so that would be something that I feel like as a member of Congress, I would want to drive towards that and figure out, how do we help these truly small businesses? How do we help people get out of a job to start what I would call an employment replacement business? And how do we make sure that they have the ability to do that from a financial standpoint? So that's my take on that. As far as the Fed and the rates, obviously I'm not a fan of the Fed at all. I also don't think that it's good for America. I think free capitalism is good for America. I think allowing our system to drive, the measures is much better. And as far as Jerome Powell, I think he's a political hack, and it's unfortunate. I think he's on his way out one way or another, whether President Trump makes it happen or whether, he just doesn't get his term renewed or whatever. But it's sad that they recently skipped the opportunity to at least take a chunk out of the interest rates, because that would help everyone in America, not just us and our national debt, but it would also help small businesses to be able to borrow. But the truth is the cuts that should be made are radical. I mean, I think we're at 4% now. We should be at or below 1%. So we're talking about a massive shift. And once again, the Fed is not paying attention. They're not looking ahead. They're navel gazing instead of looking out into the future and seeing what the rest of us all see.
Well, do you think that the jobs number that came in on Friday, it was, certainly lower than expectations? We feel like that really confirmed that the Fed is really too late, to borrow a phrase from President Trump. But we feel like the Fed it kind of proves that the Fed is too late, because if you're seeing the employment slow down, small businesses aren't able to expand because they're not able to get the capital to do so. So it's kind of, it builds on itself, the problem. And so if they would cut the rates, we'd see small business take advantage of the new tax policy and invest in their businesses and thereby create jobs. And then the jobs numbers would grow. So it's real easy to see. And the Fed, is constantly looking at data, but all they can do is look at data in the rear on what has happened to make their decisions. And instead, they're looking forward and saying, we think we're going to have inflation because of the tariffs. And, my argument is just really simple. I'm not an economist, so I just think, okay, well, right now we don't have inflation. We haven't had inflation for 6 months. It's been kept in check. It's exactly where it needs to be. So cut the rates, give our small businesses the break. And if you see inflation start to go up, move quickly. Don't wait till so long. I mean, you just can't be late to the party every single time on the way up and on the way down.
There's so much there to unpack. I do agree with you. I think the Feds, I pictured, I'm trying to remember this YouTuber just recently. I wish I could remember his name, but they flipped a truck chassis. They flipped a body backwards on a truck. And so he was driving the truck down the road, but the truck looked visually like it was driving backwards. So he was looking out the back window because they had flipped it around on the chassis. And that's kind of what I think the Fed operates like. They're all sitting in the vehicle, turned around, looking out the back window, and while the car is actually going forward. And they have never been really good at sort of reading the tea leaves. And it's sad because they have access to every bit of data imaginable, and they absolutely should. So yeah, it's very disappointing. I think your assumption is it holds water, and I wouldn't disagree with that. I just struggle with whether or not the actual data that they're putting out for jobs is accurate. I think President Trump is hitting on something that's actually true. And if you look back onto the Joe Obama administration, every single quarter, they would release data that made them look very good, and then they would quietly adjust that data over the period of that quarter. And then again, the next quarter, they would release data that would again make them look good, and then quietly adjust it. They did it every single time throughout the entire administration. And it was pretty much under the same people that are running it now today. And again, just like Jerome Powell at the Fed, he's expressing his partisanship, just like many of these judges who are ruling against things that are just pure lunacy, that don't require a law degree to understand the Constitution and the direction it should go. The same thing with this, and it's incredibly unfortunate for the American people. And I think that we're going to see some improvements, but I will say that it is contingent on some of these big decisions. And I'll say that even for me in my own community, in my own neighborhood, I do feel like there is tightening, and where people they're confident in President Trump, but they're just looking at their finances and saying, wow, everything is really expensive. I was hoping things were going to come down quicker under President Trump. And I'm not sure I want to spend that money right now. And so we need radical changes, because what you're talking about, and I'll get off this point, but your comment and your assumption in terms of the low jobs numbers being indication that we have financial trouble in small business is absolutely true. The problem is it probably is 6 to 9 months behind, meaning it would have taken a long time for that trajectory to actually happen. And it could very well be true, but would also be a clear indication that we need to make radical changes yesterday to account for that, and to make sure that we get these small businesses going. And I just want to make one comment. There is no statistical basis or any sort of sense that comes out of saying that tariffs are going to cause inflation. It doesn't even make economic sense for anybody to say that. And it's professionally embarrassing for those who stand on that. Again, it's partisanship, because they want to do everything they can to frustrate President Trump's progress. But if they actually understood the economy, they would realize that it's pure lunacy to even say that.
Yeah, and my next question for you was going to be about trust in American institutions. It it does seem like at this point we're such a divided country, and the vitriol against specifically President Trump is so great. um, you know, he brought back the presidential physical fitness test, which I remember doing in elementary school, and it went away under the Obama administration. And you know, I can remember being nervous about not passing it, to be honest with you. And I was super athletic as a kid, but
Yeah, we had the same thing. Yeah,
it
we had the
seemed
same thing in the
hard,
military.
Yeah, those pull ups seemed pretty hard. But I even see, because he's bringing it back, I even see criticism about that. I mean, we literally have seen the other side and liberals in Congress and around the country, and folks, influencers online, literally take Iran's side, because it was this president that bombed them, and took out their nuclear capabilities. Like it's just, we're so divided. And I wish that we could get to a point where you could recognize, hey, that's a good thing because we have an obesity problem in this country, particularly with our children. I mean, we've got children who are headed for type 2, in their teenage years because of the lack of activity. And instead of just sometimes recognizing something good to try to find some common ground, they couldn't even recognize that that was a good thing.
Yeah.
And then on Saturday, of course, the negotiations fell apart to get some of Trump's nominees through. I mean, when
Mhm.
you're the president of the United States, you won election. You deserve to have who you want working in your administration. Biden deserved it. Trump deserved it. Period. End of story. And instead, it was they wanted to get money for it was pay to play, right? They wanted
Yeah.
money to vote for the nominees. And my response was, hey, we don't negotiate with terrorists, right? You
Yeah.
just can't. You can't negotiate with terrorists on these issues. Whoever the president is deserves to have their administration in place. And we're 6 months in, and we don't have the administration in place.
Yeah, we're on track to be over a year before his people are in. It's completely ridiculous, um, and quite frustrating. It's difficult, just big picture on what you're talking about in terms of the division in our country. Um, Many people ask me this in terms of running for Congress. How will I appease and how will I work with the people across the aisle? Look, I have no problem working with any other American on rational issues, but when there are issues that to me are not negotiable, I have zero interest in negotiating with those people. There are way too many positions on the left and that the left has taken, and this is really why the Democrat Party's demise is upon them, is because they've taken up positions that are absolutely the antithesis of what it means to be American. Many of their positions are unconstitutional. They're racist on their face. They're anti-capitalist. They're pro-communist. They are struggling to define the difference between a man and a woman. They're wanting to do gender mutilation, physical surgeries on minors. They want it to be okay for adults to be able to have sexual connection or whatever with young people, with minors. I mean, there are so many issues that are just, to me, not negotiable, that it does put us in a difficult spot because, as you say, a lot of this stuff is, I think, excused by their TDS or their dislike for President Trump or anything that he approves of. But I think that the bigger story is that our fight is not against the flesh and blood; it's against the principalities and powers that are upon us, and it's a spiritual battle. And so, how do we fight that? I think the truth is that we fight it on our knees, for starters, and then we get up and we stand up, just like you and I are doing, just really regular Americans. putting in the work to educate ourselves on what did our framers intend, what is God's intent for America, what's his calling on America, and then just doing our best effort to defend that and to stand for that. I was on the phone the other night with one of my friends who's in Congress, and he's one of the strong conservatives, of people that actually stand for what's great for America. And he's frustrated because of people like the guy I'm running against, Dan Newhouse, signed up for this. He co-sponsored this thing called the Dignity Act, which is essentially going to allow amnesty for 40 to 50 million people in our country, on a scale that's unheard of, in the midst of President Trump setting all these steps in place to try to encourage people to self-deport. And anyway, the point being that when the Democrats are in control, they're unified in their lunacy. When the Republicans are in control, we're divided because a segment or a faction of them really want to support these crazy radical Democrat policies, while the rest of them are more conservative and want to see those things happen. And that's again why I feel like why I wrote the book, which you mentioned. But I think, and again, I have the utmost respect for President Trump, but we have to start to look at what are the true broken mechanisms in this country and how do we fix it. And it starts with sending good people to represent us that are not there to, enrich themselves, but they're there to truly serve and to help our country move forward, whether it's small business or family or anything else, instead of, this terrible fall that the left wants us to take.
Well, I think that you are absolutely correct that sending good people to Congress is the best way to move us forward in a beneficial way that helps the American people, instead of, each side trying to gain as much power as possible for an agenda that might not be in the best interest of the American people. I'd like to see more people who have a business background, small business owners, who understand, like yourself, who understand what it means to sign the front of a paycheck, and understand how difficult that is to meet a payroll every week. When you understand that basic thing, you don't need an MBA to do it.
Right.
When you understand how hard it is to meet payroll every Friday, you understand how a policy can really hurt that small business owner. And those are the kinds of people that we need in Congress. Those are the kinds of people that will understand how healthcare can impact small business owners, how taxes can impact small business owners, how a new regulation can impact a small business owner. It's not a one size fits all. So you talk about decentralizing out of Washington, D.C. The important point behind that, you've made just some great points in our conversation, but the decentralization is because in D.C., they want a one size fits all. Mm-hmm. And the small business owners in Florida, where I live, have way different challenges than the business owners in Washington, where you are. They just do. They have different challenges. Now, the policies, they need the same kinds of general policies in the sense of low taxes, low regulations, access to capital. But Florida is going to have a different dynamic than Washington. And you can't understand that from DC. And that's right. Part of, you've made some great points. So I appreciate the conversation and the insight. But yeah, I think getting some small business owners in DC, more of them who understand all of these issues, is going to be so important going forward, so that we can help with a conservative agenda and a pro-small business agenda.
Yeah, the legislative branch is the most powerful of the three branches. People call the government, the federal government, made up of three co-equal branches. Is not true. If you read the Constitution, it's very clear that the legislative branch is the most powerful. That's the branch that has the right authority. They can cross out and they can rewrite the Constitution. That is power. That's also why there's 535 members, because you have to have consensus in order to make big changes like that. That's also why it's tied to state legislatures, where if there's, for example, constitutional amendments, those have to be ratified by the state legislatures in order for them to become law. What people don't realize is that if you have feckless, useless, selfish people going to Washington, D.C., they're not going to produce collectively results for you that are going to help you. They're at best are going to sort of kick the can down the road. And I'm just tired of that. I want to see change. I want to see America thrive. When you look at what's happening under President Trump and you realize, you start to get a vision for what is possible in this country, it gets me excited, and it should excite every single American, especially small business owners who realize how incredible of a life and how much we could be thriving on the world stage if we would just get decent members in Congress who would fight for us every single day. Just imagine this. Think about this. What if every member of Congress was as passionate about making America great and doing the bidding of the American people as President Trump and his cabinet team are? Imagine what we would have in this country if we had that kind of Congress. And until we as American people stand up and realize that the long arms of the government, the federal government, are actually quite unconstitutional, then nothing is going to change in this country. Read the 10th Amendment. It's very clear that the federal government is supposed to be limited and submitted to the state governments. And that is not the kind of country that we live in now. And we've got to change that. And the best way to do it is to send great people to Congress, and supporting great people like me, if I can toot my own horn, that wants to go, because I've had such a great life. I want to make sure that the American people that come behind me, my kids included, have the ability to enjoy the great life that we should be having here in America.
Okay, final question, and very important. Can you tell everyone where they can buy your book, find out more about you, and buy your game that you created, Easy Profit?
Yeah, you can go to the easyprofitgame.com for the game. And for the book, you can go to howwebrokeamerica.com to get that. This is an amazing book. It is a truly unique book, different than probably anything else that you've ever seen in a book. And I think that you will enjoy it. My most common social platform is Twitter. I'm at Sessler. It's just my last name. And I'm also on Facebook sometimes, just because a lot of people in my district are on there. But, those are the best ways. Totally open to communicating with people, and, appreciate you supporting me either by buying the book, buying the game, or donating to my campaign. Very much appreciate that, and appreciate the time today having me on this.
Well, great. Jerrod, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Main Street Matters. We are America's small business megaphone. And thank you all for taking the time to tune in. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast from, and we'll be back soon with another episode. Bye for now.